The elderly woman, her gait slowed by age, shuffled through the quiet cemetery, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp autumn air. She clutched a bouquet of fresh marigolds, her daughter's favorite. It had been years since her daughter, Emily, had been laid to rest, yet the ache in her heart never seemed to fade. Today, she sought the solace that only visiting Emily's grave could bring. As she rounded the familiar oak tree, a figure caught her. Small, frail, and unfamiliar, a girl no more than 17 knelt before her daughter's gravestone, shoulders trembling with quiet sobs. Her long, dark hair veiled her face, and her hands clutched the edges of the headstone as if it were a lifeline. The woman's steps faltered, a chill running down her spine that had little to do with the weather. Who was this girl, and why was she here, mourning her Emily? She drew closer, her voice quivering as she called out, "Excuse me, dear, are you all right?" The girl jolted, her sobs hitching into silence. Slowly she turned her head, revealing tear-streaked cheeks and wide, startled eyes. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two strangers united by their grief. The elderly woman could see the raw pain in the girl's gaze, but there was something more, a flicker of recognition that made the woman's heart skip a beat. I'm sorry," the girl whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to intrude, it's just, I needed to see her." The elderly woman frowned, confusion knitting her brows. "See her? How did you know my Emily?" The girl swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears away. She glanced back at the gravestone, her fingers tracing the carved letters with a tenderness that seemed impossible for a stranger. She helped me once when no one else would," the girl murmured, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. I never got the chance to thank her." The elderly woman's breath caught in her throat, 1,000 questions swirling through her mind, but before she could speak, the girl's eyes welled up again, and she looked at the woman with an expression of desperate sincerity. "Please, if it's all right, can I tell you what happened?" The elderly woman hesitated, then nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She gestured toward a nearby bench under the sprawling branches of the oak tree, where fallen leaves had formed a soft blanket of red and gold. They sat together, an odd pairing, one aged by the years, the other seemingly burdened by a weight she should never have had to carry. The girl took a deep breath, composing herself before beginning. "It was 3 years ago. I was in a really bad place. I ran away from home, my parents, and we couldn't see eye to eye on anything, and I thought I'd be better off alone. But I wasn't. I was lost and scared, living on the streets wondering if anyone would even notice if I disappeared." Her voice cracked and she paused to catch her breath, her fingers twisting nervously around the hem of her jacket. The elderly woman listened intently, her heart aching for this young soul, even as she tried to make sense of the connection to her daughter. "One night I found myself outside a cafe, starving, and there she was. Your daughter, Emily," the girl continued, her lips curling into a small, sad smile. "She was closing up for the night, but when she saw me, she didn't turn me away. She brought me inside, made me a hot meal. It was the first time in days I'd felt warmth, not just in my belly, but inside me, you know?" The elderly woman's throat tightened, a memory surfacing of how Emily used to talk about the people she met at the cafe, the ones she would never turn away if they needed help. She had always had a way of seeing beyond the surface, of offering a hand without judgment. "She asked me about myself, but not in that prying way adults usually do," the girl said, her voice thick with emotion. "She just listened. I told her about the fights with my parents, about how I felt like I didn't belong anywhere, and she told me that she understood, that she knew how lonely it could feel when no one seems to hear you." The girl's hands shook, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She gave me a blanket, some money, and she made me promise to go back home, to try to make things right with my family. I didn't want to, but the way she looked at me, I felt like maybe I had a chance, like maybe someone cared, and because of her, I did go home. We're not perfect, my parents and but we're trying. We're together." She paused, turning her gaze back to the gravestone, her eyes glistening. "I came here today to say thank you, to let her know that she saved me, even if she never knew it." Silence settled between them, heavy and profound, broken only by the whispering wind through the trees. The elderly woman felt tears prickling her own eyes, her breath coming in uneven gasps as she tried to process the unexpected revelation. She had never known about this encounter, about the life Emily had touched and changed without seeking recognition or thanks. The girl's voice trembled again as she added, "I'm so sorry she's gone, but I hope she knew how much she meant to people like me." The elderly woman reached out with a trembling hand, gently grasping the girl's fingers. There was a deep ache in her chest, but alongside it, a warmth, a sense of pride in her daughter that she hadn't felt in so long. She had a way of seeing people, of giving when no one else would, the elderly woman said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for sharing this with me. It means more than you'll ever know." As the girl nodded, wiping away fresh tears. The elderly woman found herself wondering about the things we leave behind, about the echoes of kindness that ripple out, touching lives in ways we might never realize. But before she could voice her thoughts, the girl's expression changed, a shadow passing over her face as she glanced over her shoulder, back towards the cemetery entrance. Her voice grew hushed, urgent. I think someone's been following me here. I didn't notice at first, but I've felt it every time I've come. And today, I saw a figure in the distance before you arrived." The elderly woman stiffened, a chill running through her. She scanned the rows of gravestones, the shadows stretching long in the evening light. For the first time, a sense of unease crept into the peaceful cemetery. Who was this stranger that haunted the girl's visits? And what did they want? The elderly woman's pulse quickened, a new tension weaving itself through the air. She followed the girl's gaze, her eyes darting between the solemn gravestones and the thickening shadows that stretched out like fingers across the cemetery. There was no one in sight, but the unease lingered, pressing down on them both like a gathering storm. "Did you see who it was?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile sense of safety between them. The girl shook her head, her hands still trembling slightly. "No, just a dark figure, always far enough that I couldn't make out any details. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but it's happened too many times now, and today I felt them watching me from the moment I got here." The elderly woman's mind raced, torn between disbelief and a rising protective instinct for this stranger who seemed so vulnerable. She glanced again toward the cemetery gate, where the iron bars cast long shadows on the ground. But all remained still. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than chance. "Let's not linger here," she suggested gently, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll walk you out, dear. We can call someone, maybe the police if you feel unsafe." The girl looked uncertain, but after a moment she nodded. Together, they stood and made their way down the winding path, the elderly woman supporting the girl with a reassuring hand on her shoulder as they walked. The girl clutched her jacket tighter around herself, her eyes darting toward every shifting shadow. But just as they neared the cemetery gate, a voice echoed through the air, low and rough, stopping them both in their tracks. "Leaving so soon?" The elderly woman's heart lurched and she turned sharply, searching for the source of the voice. The girl froze, her face going pale as she clung to the older woman's arm. In the deepening dusk, a figure emerged from behind a tall tombstone, dressed in a dark coat that blended with the shadows. The figure stepped closer, revealing a man, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to glint with something unreadable. "Who are you?" the elderly woman demanded, mustering all the strength she had, though her hands trembled. "What do you want with this girl?" The man's gaze flickered to the girl, a strange smile curling his lips. He ignored the elderly woman's question, addressing the girl directly. "You shouldn't have come back here. Some places, some people, are best left forgotten." The girl shrank back, gripping the elderly woman's arm even tighter, but she drew in a shaky breath and faced the man. "Why are you following me? What do you want from me?" The man's expression shifted, his smile fading. He took another step forward, his voice growing colder, harsher. "You have something that doesn't belong to you, something that ties you to her. You think no one else knows, but I do." The elderly woman's mind reeled. Her? Was he talking about Emily? And what could the girl possibly have that mattered to this stranger? "Look, I don't know what you're talking about," the girl stammered, panic rising in her voice. "I never took anything, I swear." But the man shook his head, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "It's not what you took, it's what she left you with, and until you give it up, you'll never be free." The girl's breath hitched, her eyes widening as if a realization had just struck her. She turned toward the elderly woman, desperation and fear mingling in her gaze. "Please, you have to believe me. I don't know what he means, but if he's right, if I have something from Emily, then I'll give it up. I'll do whatever it takes, just help me get away from him." The elderly woman, her own fear barely contained, nodded firmly, drawing herself up to her full height. Despite the weight of her years, she clutched the girl's hand and turned toward the gate, determination burning in her chest. "Run," she urged, her voice carrying a newfound strength. "Run, and don't look back." As they made their way toward the exit, the man's voice rang out behind them, his words chilling and cryptic. "You can't escape what's already inside you, girl. You'll see." They stumbled out of the cemetery, the cold night air biting against their skin, but the danger was far from over now, with questions swirling around them. What did the man mean? What connection tied the girl to Emily's memory? The elderly woman realized that this mystery went deeper than she could have ever imagined. And as they hurried down the darkened street, she couldn't shake the feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason. One that might unravel secrets long buried beneath the weight of grief and shadows. They hurried down the dimly lit path, the crunch of leaves underfoot. The only sound breaking the silence between them, the elderly woman kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the shadowy figure following them. But the cemetery gate stood empty, the night swallowing any sign of the man. Still, his words echoed ominously in her mind. "You can't escape what's already inside you." After a few tense minutes, they reached the main road where a few sparse streetlights cast long beams across the pavement. The elderly woman fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking with the aftershock of fear, but the girl placed a hand on her arm, stopping her. "Wait," the girl said, her voice urgent. "Please don't call the police. If he's right, if I'm somehow tied to Emily, I need to understand why, and I think you might be the only one who can help me." The elderly woman stared at her, caught between fear and a strange, protective instinct. Her whole life had become about surviving the emptiness left by her daughter's death. And yet, in the midst of this encounter, something inside her stirred. Hope, maybe, or the desire to piece together this mystery that now linked them. Finally, she nodded, slipping the phone back into her coat pocket. "All right," she said softly, glancing back toward the darkened path they had left behind. "But we can't talk here. Let's go to my house. It's not far, and it's safe there." The girl nodded gratefully, and together they made their way through the quiet town, the tension between them slowly easing with each step. The elderly woman's home, a small cottage with ivy creeping along its brick walls, soon appeared in view. She led the girl inside, locking the door behind them and double-checking the windows. Her mind still reeling with questions, she set the girl down at the kitchen table, the warm light casting a comforting glow over the worn wooden surface. As she brewed a pot of tea, she couldn't help but glance at the girl, trying to piece together how this young stranger could be connected to her Emily. When she returned to the table with 2 steaming cups, she finally asked, "You mentioned that Emily might have left you with something. What did you mean by that?" The girl wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her cold fingers. She hesitated before answering, as if unsure of her own words. "I don't know exactly, but after that night at the cafe, strange things started happening to me. It was little at first, dreams, feelings that didn't feel like they were my own. I'd dream of places I'd never been, people I'd never met, and sometimes I'd hear her voice like she was trying to reach me, but I couldn't understand what she was saying." The elderly woman felt a chill prickling her skin. This was beyond anything she had imagined, but there was a desperate sincerity in the girl's eyes, a fear that couldn't be faked. She reached across the table, grasping the girl's hand gently. "Tell me more about these dreams," she urged. "What did you see? What did you hear?" The girl closed her eyes as if searching through her memories. "It's mostly fragmented, but there's one dream that keeps coming back. I'm standing in front of a house, a small cottage covered in ivy, like this one actually, and she's there, your daughter, standing on the porch. She looks sad, like she's trying to tell me something, but her lips don't move. Then there's this feeling, this overwhelming sense of loss and a name." Her voice faltered, and she met the elderly woman's gaze, her expression pleading. "The name is Anna. I don't know who she is, but every time I wake up, I feel like I'm supposed to find her, like she's the key to understanding all of this." The elderly woman's breath caught in her chest. That name, Anna, was one she hadn't spoken in years. It was the name of Emily's little sister, who had died in a tragic accident when she was just a child. Emily had never fully recovered from the loss, carrying a quiet grief that had shadowed her life ever since. How do you know that name?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Anna was Emily's sister. She died when she was just a child. Emily never spoke of her to anyone after it happened." The girl's eyes widened in shock, her hands clutching the edge of the table as if she needed to hold on to something solid. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. But now it makes sense in the dreams. I feel like I'm trying to reach out to someone to make something right. What if Emily is trying to reach you through me? What if she's trying to tell us something about Anna?" The elderly woman's heart pounded in her chest, the room spinning slightly as the weight of the girl's words settled over her. Could it be true? Could there be a message? A connection between her lost daughters, lingering in this girl's unexplained visions? But before she could voice her thoughts, a soft knock echoed through the quiet house. They both froze, staring toward the front door. The elderly woman's hand flew to her mouth, her pulse racing. The girl glanced at her, fear flashing in her eyes. "Do you think it's him?" "I don't know," the elderly woman whispered, rising slowly from her chair. "Stay here." She crept toward the door, each step heavy with dread, and pressed her ear to the wood. The knock came again. Gentle, almost hesitant, she took a deep breath, steeling herself, and then turned the knob, pulling the door open just enough to peek outside. But what she saw made her blood run cold. Standing on the porch, bathed in the soft glow of the porch light, was a figure she recognized immediately, one she hadn't seen in years. It was Anna, the little girl, just as she had been before the accident. Her face pale and eyes wide with a sorrow that seemed to stretch beyond time, and as the elderly woman gasped, stumbling back, the girl in the kitchen called out in a voice trembling with realization, "Who is it? What do you see?" The woman tried to find her voice, but it came out as a choked whisper, her mind reeling with the impossible sight before her. It's Anna!" The elderly woman stumbled back, her legs feeling weak beneath her as she clutched the doorframe for support. Her mind whirled with disbelief, a tumult of grief and confusion crashing over her like a wave. She blinked, her breath coming in shallow gasps, but the vision of Anna remained, standing there with that sorrowful expression, her small hands clasped together. She couldn't believe it, couldn't understand how this was possible. Anna had died so many years ago, lost in that tragic accident that had shattered her family. Yet here she stood, looking up at her with wide, knowing eyes. Her lips slightly parted as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. Behind her, the girl called out again, more urgently, the sound of her footsteps approaching. "Who is it? What's happening?" The elderly woman turned, her eyes wide and frantic as she faced the girl, struggling to make sense of it all. It's Anna. My Anna, but how can it be?" The girl's expression shifted from fear to shock, then to a kind of determination as she pushed past the woman, peering out the open door. But when she looked, she saw nothing. Only the empty porch and the night stretching out beyond. She turned back to the elderly woman, her brow furrowed. "There's no one there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't see anything." The elderly woman clutched her chest, feeling the rapid thud of her heartbeat. Her mind spun, struggling to grasp the difference between what she had seen and what the girl was telling her. She took a shaky step back and glanced again at the porch. But Anna's figure was gone, as if swallowed by the darkness. The girl hesitated, then took the elderly woman's hand, guiding her back inside and gently closing the door behind them. They moved back to the kitchen, where the tea sat untouched and cooling, the warmth of the house contrasting with the chill that seemed to linger in the air. "I believe you," the girl said softly, breaking the silence. "Even if I couldn't see her, I believe that you did, and I think this is all connected. Your daughter, Anna, whatever's happening with me, maybe that man at the cemetery was right. Maybe there's something inside me that ties us together." The elderly woman sat down heavily, pressing a hand to her forehead as she tried to make sense of everything. Her mind flashed back to those last years with Emily, to the way she had never truly recovered from losing her little sister. How a sadness had lingered behind her eyes even when she smiled. It had been like a shadow over their lives, one she had tried to help Emily move past, but it had always been there. "If Anna was trying to reach out to me, why now?" she asked, her voice wavering. "Why through you?" The girl shook her head, her expression desperate. "I don't know, but maybe it's because I've been trying to find answers too. Maybe that night when Emily helped me, she knew there was something unfinished, something she couldn't let go of until now." A heavy silence settled between them, filled with questions neither of them could answer, but the elderly woman felt a pull inside her, a sense that they were on the edge of uncovering something that had been hidden in the darkness for too long. Her grief, her loss, the unresolved pain of losing not just one daughter but two, it all seemed to weave together with the strange presence of this girl and the shadowy warnings of the man in the cemetery. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening as she looked into the girl's eyes. "If Emily or Anna are trying to tell us something, we need to find out what it is. You said you see things in your dreams. Maybe that's where we should start. Can you try to remember more? Anything that might give us a clue?" The girl nodded, her expression determined even as uncertainty flickered in her gaze. "I'll try. I've been afraid of those dreams for so long, but I'll try to focus on them now to see if there's anything we missed." With that, they began to piece together everything they could remember. Every detail of the dreams, every memory that the elderly woman had of her daughters. They spoke deep into the night, each word bringing a new layer to the mystery that bound them together. And as the hours passed, the elderly woman began to realize that this might be the beginning of a journey, one that would take them into the depths of grief, memory, and the mysteries that linger between the living and the dead. But she couldn't have known then, as the candle flickered low and the first light of dawn crept through the window, that the answers they sought would bring them face to face with a truth far darker and more profound than either of them could have imagined. The elderly woman and the girl sat together at the kitchen table, their conversation stretching on into the early morning hours. Unraveling strands of memories and dreams, a deeper sense of purpose began to bind them, a fragile alliance born from their shared loss, and the strange, otherworldly presence that seemed to link them. The girl closed her eyes. Focusing on the fragments of her dreams that had haunted her for so long, she described them in detail. Her voice low and steady, though laced with uncertainty. She spoke of the ivy-covered cottage that resembled the elderly woman's home, the lonely streets, and most vividly, of Emily standing in front of the house, her lips forming silent words. The elderly woman listened, her own thoughts drifting back to the last days with Emily, remembering the way her daughter's gaze would linger on family photos, especially those with Anna's smiling face. It had been as if Emily was always trying to reach for something she could never quite grasp. Now, hearing the girl's accounts, the elderly woman felt a stirring of hope that perhaps this was Emily's way of finishing what she had left undone. The girl paused, opening her eyes again, her brow furrowed as she recalled a specific image that had recurred in several dreams. "There's something else," she said. "A place, a clearing in the woods with an old stone well. I don't know why, but in the dreams, Emily is always standing near it, looking down into the water, I think. I think that place might be real. Maybe it's somewhere she used to visit." The elderly woman stiffened at the mention of the well. Memories flooded back. Days from decades ago when Emily and Anna were just children, playing in the woods near an old stone well that had long since dried up. It had been one of their favorite places to explore, hidden deep among the trees, a place that had seemed like a world of its own. But after Anna's death, they had never gone back. There, the well, like so many memories, had become something they chose to forget. "I know the place you're talking about," she said slowly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I haven't been there in years. It's deep in the woods behind the old cottage. Emily and Anna used to play there when they were little. I'd almost forgotten about it." The girl's eyes widened, a spark of hope lighting her face. "Then maybe that's where we need to go. If she's trying to reach us, maybe the answers are there." The elderly woman hesitated, fear gnawing at her heart. The thought of returning to that place with all the memories it held felt like opening an old wound, but she knew she couldn't ignore this, not when it might hold the key to understanding what had happened to her daughters, to unraveling the connection between Emily and this girl. She nodded, her hands trembling as she pushed herself up from the table. "All right, we'll go there. But we need to be careful. I don't know what we'll find, or if that man might still be watching us," the girl agreed. And together they gathered what they needed: flashlights, warm clothes, and the strength to face whatever lay ahead as they stepped out into the early dawn. The air was crisp with the promise of a new day, but the sky remained overcast, casting a gray pallor over the woods that stretched out beyond. The walk through the forest was slow, the elderly woman's steps unsteady on the uneven ground, but the girl stayed close, helping her when she faltered. They moved deeper into the woods, the trees closing in around them, their breath misting in the cold morning air. Finally, they reached the clearing where the old stone well sat like a silent sentinel among the fallen leaves. The well looked just as the elderly woman remembered: its stones, worn smooth by time, the opening yawning like a dark mouth against the earth. The girl approached it, her expression pensive, as if she were trying to summon the dream into reality. "I think this is it," she murmured, peering down into the depths of the well. "This is where she wanted me to come." The elderly woman joined her, looking down into the darkness below. For a moment there was nothing, only the faint sound of the wind rustling through the trees. But then a whisper seemed to rise from the depths of the well. A voice carried on the wind that wrapped around them both, bringing with it a feeling of intense longing and sorrow. "Do you hear that?" the girl whispered, her eyes wide as she clutched the edge of the well. "It sounds like she's calling?" The elderly woman nodded, her breath catching in her throat as a faint, echoing voice drifted up from the well, barely more than a sigh. It was Emily's voice, fragile, ghostly, but unmistakably hers. "Anna, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The words seemed to reach out to them, a plea carried from the past. And the elderly woman felt tears stinging her eyes. She had never known the depth of Emily's guilt, had never realized how much her daughter had carried with her after Anna's death. She reached out a trembling hand, resting it on the rough stones of the well, as if hoping to touch the memory that lingered there. "She's asking for forgiveness," the elderly woman whispered, her voice breaking. "For Anna. But why? What happened that day?" The girl's brow furrowed as if struggling to recall something just beyond her reach. She closed her eyes, leaning closer to the well, letting the whispers wash over her, and then, suddenly, her eyes snapped open, a new realization dawning in their depths. I think she blames herself," the girl said, her voice unsteady. "For what happened to Anna, maybe she thinks she could have saved her, that it was her fault." The elderly woman's heart clenched at the thought. It had never been Emily's fault. Anna's death had been a tragic accident, a slip on the rocks by the riverbank where they used to play. But if Emily had believed otherwise, if she had carried that weight all these years, then perhaps that was why she had reached out now, through this girl, trying to find the peace she could never grant herself in life. And as they stood there, a soft glow began to emanate from the well, a pale light that illuminated the stones from within. It cast long shadows over the clearing, but there was a warmth to it, a sense of a presence that felt familiar, comforting. The girl gasped softly, reaching out toward the light. And in that moment, a vision seemed to unfold between them. A memory, as if the well itself held the last moments of that day. They saw a younger Emily standing by the river's edge, calling out for her sister, her face twisted with panic as the current swept Anna away. The vision blurred with tears and then faded, leaving only the glow of the well. The elderly woman's knees buckled, and she clung to the edge of the well, sobs shaking her frail frame. "Oh, Emily, you should never have blamed yourself." The girl knelt beside her, resting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "She's been waiting all this time, hoping that someone would understand, that you would forgive her." The elderly woman nodded through her tears, her voice breaking as she spoke into the quiet morning air. "I forgive you, my dear. You were always so much more than you thought you were." And as the words left her lips, the glow from the well softened, as if it were being drawn back into the earth, into the silence of the past. The air around them seemed to shift, the heaviness lifting, leaving behind a sense of release, of something finally put to rest. But as they turned to leave, the girl paused, glancing back one last time at the shadowed forest and the quiet well. "Do you think it's over now?" The elderly woman reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I don't know, child, but I think we've taken the first step, and whatever comes next, we'll face it together." They left the clearing behind, the forest whispering around them like a chorus of long-forgotten voices. And though the answers they had found were painful, there was a new sense of peace between them, a fragile hope that perhaps, with time, the wounds of the past might finally begin to heal. The elderly woman and the girl walked back through the woods, each step feeling lighter than the last, as if the forest itself had released the weight of its secrets. The morning air carried a hint of warmth now, the gray sky beginning to give way to threads of sunlight that filtered through the trees. Yet, a lingering uncertainty hung in the air between them, an unspoken question of what might come next. As they approached the edge of the woods, the elderly woman paused, looking back toward the clearing that held the well. A part of her wanted to stay there a moment longer, to hold on to the sense of connection she had felt to Emily, to Anna, and to the girl who had become a strange, unexpected bridge between their worlds. But she knew that the living had to return to the present, even as they carried the echoes of the past within them. They reached the cottage, where the warm light of the kitchen window beckoned, promising the comforts of home. The elderly woman invited the girl inside once more, offering her breakfast and a chance to rest after their long emotional journey. As the girl settled at the table, exhaustion tugging at her features, she gave the elderly woman a small, tentative smile. "I think I understand a little better now," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Why Emily reached out to me. She wanted me to help you see what she couldn't say before, and maybe she needed me to understand too." The elderly woman nodded, her own smile tinged with sadness, but softened by a new sense of closure. "You've helped me more than you know. I thought I'd already faced all my grief, but there was so much I never understood. Emily's pain, Anna's memory, it was all buried so deep." She reached out, covering the girl's hand with her own, the gesture tender and maternal. "I don't know what brought you to her grave that day, or why she chose you, but I'm glad she did. You gave her a voice when she couldn't find it herself." The girl's eyes shone with emotion, and she squeezed the elderly woman's hand in return. "And you gave me a place to belong, even if just for a while, I think. I was meant to find you both, to help put things right." They fell into a comfortable silence then, sipping their tea and sharing the warmth of a connection that had grown between them. But just as the tension seemed to melt away, a knock echoed through the quiet house, sharp and insistent. They exchanged a look, a sense of dread creeping back into their hearts. The elderly woman rose, her legs feeling unsteady as she made her way to the door. She hesitated, then slowly opened it, bracing herself for what might be on the other side. But instead of the dark-coated man she feared, a middle-aged woman stood on the porch, her expression tense, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and frustration. Her gaze immediately fell on the girl, who had followed the elderly woman to the door, her face paling at the sight. "Mom?" the girl whispered, her voice cracking with shock. The woman on the porch stepped forward, reaching out as if to pull her daughter into a fierce hug, but then she stopped herself, her hand trembling, her voice strained with emotion. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Why did you leave like that? You had us so worried." Tears welled up in the girl's eyes, and she glanced back at the elderly woman, torn between the past and the present, between the bonds she had just begun to rebuild with her family and the connection she had forged here. She swallowed hard, then turned back to her mother, her voice wavering with apology. I'm sorry, Mom. I had to find something. I didn't know how to explain, but I think I'm ready to come home now." The elderly woman watched this reunion with a bittersweet smile, feeling a pang in her chest, but knowing it was time to let go, she placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder, offering her a reassuring nod. "Go on, dear. Your family needs you, and you've done more than enough here." The girl's eyes shimmered with gratitude, and she pulled the elderly woman into a tight hug, holding on for a moment longer than she might have before. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. I'll never forget you, or Emily." The elderly woman smiled through her tears, patting the girl's back softly. "And I'll never forget you, my dear. You brought my daughter back to me, even if just for a little while." As the girl joined her mother, they walked away from the cottage, the tension between them slowly easing as they spoke in hushed tones, the distance between mother and daughter already beginning to heal. The elderly woman stood on the porch watching them until they disappeared down the road, feeling a sense of pride mingled with loss. She stayed there for a long time, letting the morning sun warm her face, her thoughts turning back to Emily and Anna and the mysteries that might never fully be answered, but she felt lighter somehow. The darkness that had clung to her heart for so long finally beginning to lift. Perhaps Emily had found peace now, and perhaps she could too. And as she turned back into the house, ready to face the day ahead, with a renewed sense of purpose, she couldn't help but feel that in the end, the real gift had been the chance to forgive herself and to let go. Yet, as she closed the door behind her, a shadow crossed the far end of the yard. Lingering just beyond the reach of the sunlight, the dark-coated man stood there, watching silently, a knowing smile playing at the edges of his lips. He tipped his hat to the empty porch, his eyes gleaming with a promise of more, secrets yet to be uncovered. And then he turned, melting into the shadows of the trees, leaving behind only the quiet rustle of the wind and a lingering sense that some stories never truly end. They simply change shape, waiting for the right moment to be heard once more. The elderly woman lingered on the doorstep, her thoughts still heavy with the echoes of the morning's events. Yet, a sense of acceptance settled over her like a warm blanket, filling the space where confusion and fear had once been. As the sun climbed higher, casting a golden glow over the autumn leaves, she allowed herself a small, tired smile. She turned back into her home, closing the door firmly behind her. The cottage was quiet now, the silence comforting rather than oppressive. She moved through the rooms, her hands trailing along the familiar furniture, the memories of her daughters weaving through her mind like a gentle breeze. The girl's presence had stirred old sorrows, but she had also helped breathe life back into forgotten corners of her heart. As she walked past the window, she paused, catching a glimpse of the woods beyond. The figure she had thought she saw, a man in a dark coat lurking at the edge of her yard, now seemed like a distant shadow, easily dismissed. Perhaps her mind, exhausted by the strange events, had simply conjured the memory of him. She made herself a fresh cup of tea and settled into her favorite armchair by the window, letting the warmth seep into her hands. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. It was a fragile peace, true, tinged with loss, but it was real. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath and allowing herself to be present in this moment of calm. Yet even as she embraced this new tranquility, a whisper seemed to stir in the back of her mind. Echoes of the well, of Emily's sorrowful voice, of that fleeting vision of Anna. A part of her knew that there would always be mysteries she could never fully unravel, threads of the past that would remain tangled in the shadows. But she also knew that the journey she had begun, one of acceptance and letting go, was one that she could continue. Whatever the man's cryptic warnings had meant, whatever the true nature of the girl's connection to her daughters, she had found what she truly needed: the strength to forgive herself, to remember without the weight of guilt, and to honor the love that had bound her family together. Even through the darkest times. As the day wore on, The elderly woman dozed off in the chair, her dreams light and untroubled, filled with the laughter of her daughters as children, the rustling of leaves, and the warmth of a long-lost summer. And though she knew that life's shadows would never fully disappear, she also knew she had found her way through them, guided by the memory of those she had loved, and the unexpected grace of a stranger who had brought a piece of her daughter back to life. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard, but the cottage remained bathed in the gentle glow of afternoon light, and somewhere beyond the woods, where shadows still lingered and mysteries remained hidden beneath the earth, a quiet peace settled over the land, like a promise that some stories, even the most painful ones, could find their own kind of ending. The elderly woman remained in her chair, the quiet of the house wrapping around her like a warm embrace. As the evening deepened, she awoke from her peaceful rest, a soft sigh escaping her lips. She felt a sense of closure that she hadn't realized she craved, a gentle acceptance that the past, however painful, no longer needed to weigh her down. She stood and made her way to the mantel, where a photograph of Emily and Anna stood in a simple wooden frame. For years, she had avoided looking at it too closely, unable to bear the ache that came with remembering happier times. But tonight, she allowed herself to pick it up, to trace the outlines of their smiling faces with her fingertips. "I hope you found each other again," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the wind outside. "And I hope you know that I've never stopped loving you." She returned the photo to its place, but something was different now. A lightness in her chest, as if she had finally laid down a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. She had faced the ghosts of her past, and though there were still unanswered questions, she no longer feared them. Emily and Anna's memories would always be with her, but they no longer felt like chains. She went about her evening rituals, cooking herself a simple dinner and tidying the house. As she moved through the familiar motions, she caught herself humming an old lullaby she used to sing to her daughters, a melody that felt like a thread linking the past to the present. It made her smile, a bittersweet warmth spreading through her. Later, as the last light faded from the sky and the stars emerged one by one, she stepped out onto the porch, feeling this cool night air brush against her skin. She glanced toward the woods one last time, half expecting to see that dark figure lurking among the trees. But there was only the night, quiet and still. The shadows deep, but no longer menacing. She took a deep breath and then turned back inside, leaving the darkness behind as she closed the door. She knew that while the past would always be a part of her, it no longer held the power it once did. It had given way to a future, one where she could carry her daughter's memories with love rather than sorrow. And as she prepared for bed, her thoughts lingered on the girl, hoping she would find her own peace as well, wherever her path led. They had crossed each other's lives for a reason, both carrying scars and searching for closure. And in that brief time together, they had given each other something invaluable. That night she slept without dreams, embraced by a deep, restful sleep she hadn't known in years. And somewhere in the quiet of the house, in the echoes of the wind outside, there was a sense of resolution, a promise that even the most tangled stories could find a way to rest. The morning would come soon enough, bringing with it the ordinary rhythms of life. But for now, she was content to let the stillness settle around her, knowing that some mysteries were meant to remain in the past, and that she was finally ready to let them be.